I just think, like, he seems to be getting this reaction as if he's a Plutar or something. Like, I've never once told you that this is a Gold Cup horse or something. It was as if the next future Gold Cup horse had suddenly been beaten 30 lengths at Listowel, the way people were chiming in.
Hello and welcome back to the Let's Talk Racing YouTube channel in association with Racing TV. Today's video, me and Andrew will be looking through the big races early season, the Ante-Post markets, and selecting maybe one or two that we think could be shorter on the day or just represent value at this point, especially if they run in those races. Obviously we do not know if all of these will run. Before we start, I did just want to get your opinion on Bardenstown Lad, who made his chasing debut today at Listowel in a 2 6 furlong beginner's chase. He was slightly disappointing.
Oh, more than slightly, Josh. You got to call it as it is. He was very disappointing. Didn't travel with any sort of enthusiasm. Look, he's a behind the bridle sort, but he snatched it a couple early on. I think that maybe slightly dented his confidence from a jumping perspective. And then he wasn't knocked about when his chance was done. I see quite a lot of people have already ruled a line through him that, he's never going to win a race again, apparently, if you listen to enough on Twitter and stuff like that. I'd say he wasn't wound up today. Listowel's not really going to suit. I'm not defending the effort because it was a bad performance, but I'd be surprised if we don't see him in a pair of blinkers or cheek pieces sometime pretty sharpish, and hopefully that might give him a little bit more verve. I'd be shocked if they didn't give chasing at least one or two more goes.
I don't think you've actually put him up for that race.
No, I haven't. Look, people just associate me with the horse and associate me with backing the horse last year. I had a great day last year, and I said we were actually watching back the review video. I said to everyone, let's see how he jumps, and today he didn't jump very good, so we're going to have to see how he goes once again. As I say, I don't think they're going to bin chasing just off the back of that. I suspect he wasn't anywhere near 100%, but he'll need to improve plenty upon that performance.
It might be that they're looking at handicaps down the line, or today was just an off day and he wasn't revved up, one of those.
I just think, like, he seems to be getting this reaction as if he's a Plutar or something. Like, I've never once told you that this is a Gold Cup horse or something. It was as if the next future Gold Cup horse had suddenly been beaten 30 lengths at Listowel, the way people were chiming in. It's as if people have forgotten, A, he's slow, B, he's behind the bridle, and C, he fell on his last start over hurdles. Like, you have to bear these things into mind. And whether I defend him or not, people will say I'm biased to defend him, but, like, you just need to calm down.
But let's get stuck into this video. The first race that we're going to look at is the Paddy Power Gold Cup, which I said wrongly in the last video that it was the Bet Victor Gold Cup. It was the Bet Victor Gold Cup last year, but Paddy Power have renewed their sponsorship of the race, and it's now the Paddy Power. It changes name every year. It's just the 2.5 mile something Gold Cup at the Cheltenham November meeting, the highlight of the week. We touched on a horse that I like, Torn and Frayed, and I still do like him. Trends that they need to have going into this. They must have experience around Cheltenham, placing or winning there. I think 19 of the last 22 winners had placed or won around Cheltenham previously. A really big competitive handicap. Looking at the market now, I crossed a few out because my Drogo heads the market 6 to 1, 11 to 2. He won't be seen this side of the new year, so he's straight away gone. Then we've got the likes of Imperial Alcazar, Celebra Delen, Torn and Frayed, Albara, the Glancing Queen, Stolen Silver. A few horses that might run Albara. Would he come over potentially for it? Unlikely, I'd say. I'd say Willie's probably got a few races lined up over in Ireland for him. Right now, looking at that race, is there anything that sticks out at all, a decent price?
Well, the one I put up on last week's video was Warlord. I see he's 16 to 1. I think that mightn't be the worst go in the world. It's not a race that you'd be backing Irish horses in. I think the Irish horses have terrible records in it. I don't think many of them will come over for it one way or the other, as you say. Obviously, the odds checker layers weren't watching our podcast with Dan Skelton. My Drogo's not even in training yet, really. So he's certainly not going to turn up. He's 6 to 1. And then you've got pretty exposed horses there, the likes of Celebra Dalen, who's a horse that was in everyone's radar last year. I never really saw the appeal personally. Like, he's an old French horse, and it reminds me of the David Pipe horses that come over and run every 3 days during the summer. Like, you can't really get affiliated to them.
And he is a 10-year-old as well. That'd be a big negative for me. The last time a horse won this race who was older than 9 was in 1975. So I don't want to throw stats down your throat, but it's not a good one. What's your thoughts on Imperial Alcazar?
I just feel they're in a rock and a hard place with Imperial Alcazar. He reminds me a little bit of Simply the Bets at the moment, in terms of he's not going to win a Grade 1, he's probably not going to win a Grade 2, but he's going to be right at the top of the handicap for these handicap chases. He's such little room for manoeuvre, and given he ran such a good race at the festival last year, eked up again for that, it's just becoming hard work, and I don't feel he's going to rock up to a race like this ever with the £4 or £5 in hand that you may need to go and win a race like this. He's the type of horse that could run a solid race, he could run into the frame 100%, he's a good horse, but he's just a hard horse to place to win races.
I'd look at him and say maybe a 3-mile chaser. 2.5 is obviously suited well, but he's probably would get an easy 3 miles. Maybe something like the Charlie Hall at Wetherby, and see what he's like in graded company. Like, his rating would suggest he's not far off that level. 153, he's clearly going to go for this, or connections have talked about it. Torn and Frayed off 139 I think is interesting. I don't know his well-being, that's the only one downside about him. The Glancing Queen off 145, Stolen Silver off 150. Are there any, what's your opinion on Torn and Frayed? Because I do quite like him.
Yeah, no, he's the type of horse that, I'm not going to lie, probably wouldn't necessarily appeal to me, but I find, again, quite difficult to affiliate myself with Nigel Twiston Davis horses. I don't know why that is, because they run good races, they run solid races. He's the type of horse that could easily win this race, and you go, yeah, a little bit like Splash of Ginge back in 2017. You could see the angle, but yet he still goes off a bit of a price. They never seem to really be gambled in, so you don't have any real feeling that there's much confidence behind them, even from the stable itself. But the way he did it, you called it to a nicety last year when he won the race in January time, and I suspect there's another big pot in him off 139. Your worry would be if he's having to turn up to this race fresh, that he's 8-9 months on the sidelines, and that's not ideal. Not that it can't be done, but it's certainly not ideal. As for the likes of the Glancing Queen, she burnt my fingers a little bit in the plate last year. Couldn't have her in a big field handicap. Don't think she really has the bottle for it. And Stolen Silver, I feel, is handicapped to the hilt off 150.
I'm going to make it my mission this week to find that out. So this time next week, you'll know if Torn and Frayed is well. I would maybe hold off on that 12 to 1 at the moment, but he is definitely in the thought process. The Greatwood Hurdle, really, really tough to even say which horses are going to run in it. The likes of West Cork, he's going to go chasing, he's top of the market, I can't see him running here. Colonel Mustard maybe, but an Irish Challenger. Adagio, Hacker to Places, Camprond, any harm in asking. I like to move it. Night Salute, I'd say Night Salute could run here, but I'd say he'd probably run in the Holdings Hurdle at the October meeting. Do you know the second season 4-year-old race, strictly for 4-year-olds? I say he could run there, and we might find out a bit more about him and his well-being this season there. Is there anything that sticks out here? Because I'm finding it very, very difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult. Look, the one I actually did jot down was Night Salute. I just feel it could be a race that, is the type of race he could win. He was very good at the start of last season. He impressed me and probably surpassed my expectations by doing what he did at Aintree after a slightly flat run in the Triumph. Now, that wasn't necessarily coming off guard for us. We didn't necessarily fancy him for the Triumph, but just the way he won at the November meeting the last time would indicate he does seem to like Cheltenham. He does like good ground, and especially if he did have that prep run, he'd certainly half in price, because the Holdings Hurdle usually only has 4 or 5 runners. I'd say it's a race that he could go off odds on in if he suddenly turned up in, and if he went and won that, he'd be half the price. And you're just looking at this market, who's definitely going to shorten. I feel Night Salute is as big a chance as almost anything in that race, in that market, should I say, to turn up. I think the whispers are Colonel Mustard's going chasing. As you say, West Cork's going chasing. Any harm in asking, we haven't seen in ages. You're taking a lot of risks on others in the market. Night Salute, Milton Harris will want a big pot this side of Christmas. I think he might be the one, if any, to have a little nibble at 16s.
I didn't come down on anything, but it is a race for young horses. 30 of the last 35 winners of this race were age 6 or under. That is a staggering stat. I think the one that is interesting is any harm in asking, because he remains the only horse to have finished in front of Constitution Hill in any sort of race. It was a point-to-point over 3 miles, so neither of their best conditions. He obviously was a slow starter last year. I think John Joe was keen to get him handicapped. He then won plenty of races on the trot, absolutely flew through the handicaps. I think it's something like 145, roughly around there now. Be interesting, because he probably does have some wiggle room off there, but you'd like to see him run before. But if he runs before, will he potentially win before, therefore he goes up? It's a really tough one with him. Also, I expected him to run in the county hurdle. It never happened. Maybe he wasn't right towards the back end of last year. So any harm in asking, definitely interesting. Could well be ahead of his handicap mark. The Betfair Chase then comes next, and this and the King George are 2 really difficult races. We'll get onto the King George later, purely because if you're actually looking at the main runners and the horses that are at the top of the market, a lot of them simply won't run. All connections have said that they're not going to. So A Plus Tard, I would expect to run.
Yep.
La Homme Presse, his connection, so part owner Andy Edwards, said this is that quote. He said he won't be going to France or Ireland or the Betfair Chase at Haydock. It's also not our intention to go for the King George, although there are a set of circumstances in which he may run in the King George. Therefore, he will have an entry, but he's ruled out the Betfair Chase, so he won't run. Ahoy Signor won't run. I think he's going to go to the Charlie Hall, or maybe the Old Roan, or even the Ladbroke Trophy, or the Coral Gold Cup. Protectorat, could he possibly run, put it up to A Plus Tard? I'm not sure where he would run otherwise. Braveman's Game's not going to run. He'll probably run the 1965 Oaksey Chase at Ascot in November over 2.5 miles as a prep run for the King George. Roy Pagaille simply isn't good enough. I think it's a case of, if A Plus Tard turns up, he's going to be 2 to 5, 1 to 3, and he's currently just over evens. Do you think that actually could be a bit of value if he gets there fit and well?
It potentially is. The only thing that worries me with Haydock, if you're betting Ante-Post at Haydock, is the ground, because sometimes you could just turn up and it could be near on unraceable. And I still think, as much as I wouldn't have any fears with A Plus Tard on soft ground, I just wonder whether connections, like if you turned up on the Thursday of declarations and it's a swamp, they'll just go, no, we don't want to bottom our horse out, we don't want to ruin our season. They're going to try and protect a Gold Cup crown. You're not going to want to leave your season behind in the middle of November, and that brings in even the likes of Bristol de May, the Royal Pagailles even of the world, if it was completely bottomless. So that would put me off. But as you say, he's a 5 to 4 shot that's going to go off 2 to 5 if it's anyway okay ground, and I think it could be an absolutely, with the greatest will of respect, it could be a rotten race in behind. Like, it could be a 4 or 5 runner race and no real genuine challengers to him. So it could be a case of him just jumping around and collecting like he did last year. So it doesn't look like a race that you'd want to have any real part of. And I just think betting Ante-Post at Haydock as a rule is, you're taking your life in your hands.
The next race we will talk about is the Coral Gold Cup, the Ladbroke Trophy. The Hennessy had so many names, just like the Paddy Power Gold Cup. This race is going to have a completely different complexion if Clanders Obo runs. If Clanders Obo does run in this race, he's going to be giving heaps of weight away off 172. And Ahoy Signor's been rumoured for that race. La Homme Presse, I would say, would go to the intermediate chase at Sandown over 3 miles, the listed one for second season chasers. But Ahoy Signor's participation, I think, will solely depend on Clanders Obo, because he would give him £11, almost a stone. Can he give Ahoy Signor £11? It'd be an impossible task, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't see it personally. Now, I must say, I don't want to drain water on the early parades here, but I just don't see the two of these horses running. I actually do see Clanders Obo running. I got that sense off Paul. I just get the sense with him. He's won so many good races with Clan that it's just another big race to potentially tick off the box. I just don't see Ahoy Senor actually turning up for this race. It's not necessarily a very fashionable race for young horses trying to progress to Gold Cup company anymore, which is a bit of a sadness in some respects, because they used to, the likes of Denman used to have to lug around 12 stone and try and test his Gold Cup credentials. But I don't see why they'll go there if they've got the likes of, as you say, the Charlie Hall. Then they could potentially go on to the Many Clouds at Aintree, keep it to 5-6 runners, keep the horse winning. Just all seems good, rather than lugging around still a big weight. Even if he was getting £11 off Clanders Obo, it would be another £10 down to the rest. and it could all go wrong. So I just don't see necessarily that happening. But as you say, if Clandes Oboe runs, it means that there's going to be horses in the mid 140s, early 150s that are going to be carrying 10 stone 4, 10 stone 5, really attractive racing weights, even though they're very good in their own right. And that might be the way into this race from an angle perspective.
Yeah, the one that I do like would be massively affected if Clandes Oboe does run. He'd be well out the handicap. But we've got the likes of Dusart, 300 through 5, Shamblu, Fiddler on the Roof, Longhouse Poet, Correct Rambler, Jericho Rock in there. Do any of those really stick out for you, or is there a different horse that you've landed on?
Yeah, no, look, there's horses in there with chances. I wouldn't say Longhouse Poet would go. Couldn't see him coming over. 300 through 5 could run. Just don't know about 300 through 5 in a really competitive handicap like that. If he went, he'd have to have a small squeak. Though the horse I landed on actually has quite close ties with Jericho Rock form-wise, and that's a horse called St. Palais. For Richard Bandy. He was a very progressive horse last year, including winning at Newbury a couple of times. He ended up finishing his season winning the lucrative novices handicap at Uttoxeter the day after the Cheltenham Festival. He skyrocketed up the weights, but I don't think his horse is done improving just yet. He's still a young horse, and he's off a mark in and around that late 140s, early 150s that I think might be exactly the type you want to see in this type of race. It's going to be a 5-6 pound gauge where you're going to have an awful lot of the runners in this. Now you could have then a few more lurking that are going to end up carrying 9 stone, 12, even 10 stone, who are maybe out of the handicap like a Jericho Rock. But I think St. Palais could be a horse that actually is continuously improving. If he's running off a nice racing weight, I can see him running a big race at a track that he does seem to love. He seems to love these long straights, galloping tracks, 3 miles. I think everything's in his favour, and he's currently 16 to 1. I've had a little nibble.
I've had a little nibble on Jericho Rock, who he did beat over course and distance in December. I just think conditions of this race suit both of those horses down to the ground. He was second at Cheltenham in the Ultima. It was a heartbreaking moment when he was passed up the hill, but I've just about got over it, and I'm willing to forgive. I do think he remains well handicapped. He's only gone up a pound to 139. What would be a downer would be if Clandes Oboe runs, because he would be out the handicap. I'm not sure he would be able to win a race like this giving free weight away. I'm not sure that would be possible. But if Clandes Oboe doesn't run, he'll be right in the mixer towards the bottom of the weights anyway. And off 139, I do think he'd go close. And I think he'd be one of those horses that you could give a really aggressive ride to. Tom Scudamore's got a good record in the race with Cloth Cap, Sizing Tennessee, etc. in recent years. Hopefully Jericho Rock can add to that, and I have backed him at 16 to 1 each way. A quick look over the Fighting Fifth and the Tingle Creek. Nothing really stuck out for me here. Anything for you?
No, not at all, really. Just seems to be, Constitution Hill's a 3s on shot for the Fighting Fifth. You wouldn't obviously be taking that. You wouldn't be taking anything against him at the same stage, and the Tingle Creek at this stage, you wouldn't know who's going to turn up. So it might be 2 races to just wait until a little bit closer to the time and then potentially assess.
And then the last race we're going to talk about is the King George. We briefly discussed this race in the last video when we were predicting. Do go over there and get your entries in if you haven't already. You've got until the end of this month to do so. But this is a really tough race again to work out who's going to run, and it could actually end up being quite weak. And I was trying to think of the Hom Press's connections, and they were saying the certain conditions. I think I may have worked those certain conditions out. So if Allaho does run, I don't think the Hom Press will run. I think if Allaho doesn't run, which I think is likely, then Brave Man's Game is likely to be towards the head of the market. And I would say that La Hom Press would run, because Galopin de Champs, very unlikely to run. I think he'll definitely go to Leopardstown. A Plus Tard, very unlikely to run. Shishkin won't run. Ahoy Senor won't run. My Drogo won't run. So then you're looking at Clandes Oboe, Tornado Flyer, maybe Envoy Len. I could see him going for something like this. Protectorat, can't really see. Maybe Nichols tries with Hitman. I know he thought he was a potential 3-mile chaser down the line, and he likes to run 3 or 4 in it. He could be a horse that runs in the race, but that wouldn't scream a strong King George to me whatsoever. And I think if it turns up with that field, Brave Man's Game, Clandes Oboe, Tornado Flyer, Enverlen, Protectorat, Hitman, I think the Hom Press would run. The race, again, a bit like Clandes Oboe and Elaborate Chase, revolves around a horse running, and that's Allaho. We both said that we don't think he'll run. Is the King George Braveman's Games to lose if Allaho doesn't turn up?
I think probably just on the balance of probabilities of course and distance form, on the balance of who's going to turn up, I just don't see the angle of Lahan Press running in this race at all. And if he does run in the race, I'd take him on. Just don't think he screams to me like a horse that would enjoy Kempton too much. I think it would almost be a little bit too sharp. I know he did winning over 2.5 last year, but I just think the way he runs, I would fancy a Braveman's Game more, even though on other tracks I'd fancy Lahan Press more than I'd fancy Braveman's Game. Don't see Allaho running in the race. As you go down that list, it's a fairly motley crew. Like, I suppose, Furlonge might come back over again, the enigma that he is. He's the type of horse, we've always said it, could run a big race. He could run into the frame. He would have ran into the frame last year in another relatively average renewal of the race. So it's not one that just screams out to you like it's going to be a vintage renewal. Sometimes it shapes up that it will be. I don't think it will be this year. And I think just if things pan out the way I see them, I don't really see a world where Braveman's Game isn't going off 2-1 on the day.
So the three that I've had a nibble on in this video were Torn and Frayed at 12-1, but I would maybe hold off yourself until we know his whereabouts and what condition he's in. No suggestion to think he's not in good condition, but we didn't see him after January last year, which would be a slight concern. Jericho Rock for the Coral Gold Cup and Braveman's Game at 6-1 for the King George. And your four are?
Warlord for the Paddy Power again. It was similar enough to Torn and Frayed. Of all of them, I'd almost be holding fire on him the most. Night Salute for the Greatwood, I think, has got a decent chance. I think that could be his angle for 16-1. Braveman's Game for the King George as well at 6-1. I agree with Josh. I think it's probably a good price based off something that's almost certain to compress. And probably the best of the lot is the one in the Coral Gold Cup, St. Palais at 16-1. He'd be my strongest of the four.
There we go. We do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button. We're going to be discussing a few other topics, a few newsy topics over on LTR Plus, so do subscribe to that if you haven't already. Get your comments down below and we look forward to seeing you soon.